I have found so many connections with this town that the evidence for a lot of those colonists coming from here is overwhelming. And if we do find the bodies or skeletons, graves of them over there in America, because they've got to be there somewhere, then, we really could rewrite the history of America. Bedford quite genuinely could be the founding fathers of America. It's as simple as that. Because the colony disappeared in 1590 and no one knows what became of them. No bodies were found, no skeletons, nothing was burnt. They had systematically removed and dismantled their village and up sticks and moved. And frankly, this is the same problem I have, big problem I have with Charles Kingsley's Westward Ho. Because, believe it or not, they are based on some degree of fact.
Yes.
Because Sir Francis Drake actually arrived on the Outer Banks late in 1586, and found Ralph Lane and the military colony there, kind of a little bit short of food and what have you, and they were waiting on Grenville to arrive with supplies. And he said, well, he said to Lane, well, I'll give you a lift home if you want. Well, Ralph Lane saying, well, sorry, he hasn't turned up yet. Richard Grenville hasn't turned up. Come on, lads, let's go home. We know that a week, and I do mean 1 week after they left, a ship arrived with supplies from Grenville. And Grenville himself arrived another week later, i.e. 2 weeks after Lane. Literally 2 weeks he arrived with the relief supplies after Drake had taken them off the island, which was strictly against the rules, by the way. They were supposed to stay there and wait his arrival. We actually know what happened to Grenville, which is fascinating because it's recorded by Philip Wyatt, ironically the town clerk of Barnstaple, who writes in his diary in 1586 that Grenville got stuck on the bar going out of the Torridge, meaning i.e. the sandbar here, because obviously he was laden down with supplies, probably misjudged it, got stuck on the bar and had to wait for the tide to change or favourable tides. And that essentially delayed his voyage. And I have found 9 family surnames. I've never wandered round the back before, by the way. 9 family surnames that are surnames of colonists. Okay. One in particular really excites me is a gravestone to a family of Harveys. Now, Harvey's not a particularly rare name, but the gravestone is spelled Harvie. Well, the Harveys were a family of the lost colonists. In fact, they actually had a son a few days after Virginia Dare, who was the firstborn American to Eleanor Dare, who was actually, raised over there. So, astonishing connection because it's an unusual spelling of the surname. As far as Kingsley is concerned, and Westward Ho, by the way, his hero, Amias, is actually, of course, Richard Grenville. And Rose Sauterne is Eleanor Dare in the original story. And what he's done is essentially corrupted the story and made it a fictional account. And it frustrates the hell out of me that we raise a statue to a third-rate novelist when actually the original story, is an essential part of this town. It's an integral part of this town, and we still don't have anything really to commemorate Grenville. This place is actually Grade 2 listed, but in the listing English Heritage had, they said, well, it's got some 18th century features, etc. There's a couple of things we've seen in there that we quite like the look of, and so we'll give it a Grade 2 listing. When I took English Heritage round some months back, they said, oh my God, we've made a mistake. This should be at least a Grade 2 star listed building, if not higher. What has been lost in this building over the ravages of time, when it was at various times the Royal Mail sorting office, and at various times a pub, different type of pub, tavern in the port and so on and so on. Well, let me ask you a question. Spiral staircases, I'm sure you've all seen them and you've been up them, etc. What way round do they go?
Anti-clockwise.
Of course, spiral staircases always go clockwise traditionally because people are, you're right-handed and you walk generally up that way. This one spirals the opposite way. Now, that is a very clear-cut feature of medieval buildings because in those days, most people were right-handed, and as you say, sir, if you were fighting, etc., your way up a staircase, you'd get your sword out and, you'd fight your way up the staircase. Well, of course, it is actually impossible to draw your sword out if you are right-handed while going up a left-handed spiral staircase. You cannot physically get your sword out. Believe me, this is well practiced. You cannot do it. So consequently, the person at the top there is just standing there going 1, 2, 3, as you're coming upstairs. So it's an interesting fragment, and there is a tiny fragment of another one elsewhere in the building that we've discovered. Well, the thing is, as you can see, it's been slightly butchered on the corner. It's certainly not the original door. It's not in its right place, let's put it that way. When I brought my good friend Mark Horton round here, he looked at that and said, well, that's odd. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, that door's Elizabethan.
It's got studs in it.
It is an Elizabethan door, okay, but not in its original location. And then we looked at this kind of little passageway that's there, which is obviously quite modern, what you can see there now, and you're welcome to just poke your nose in as you go through. And what we've realised is that actually that might have been the minstrel's gallery from the kitchen. And we'll see that on the way out, and you'll get a better idea of where everything is in relation to everything else. Why were they separate buildings in the olden days? Fire, because they always caught fire and always burnt the house down. So you always had your kitchen as a separate building, and that's what they actually had. And we've got what we believe is a remaining fragment of the kitchen wall, and it makes sense when we go back downstairs. So what they would have done is come up from the kitchen, through the minstrel's gallery, to serve the meal. And that meal, we believe, was almost certainly served in this room. We have this wonderful beam, and the dowling pegs smell of honey. And I thought, well, that's a little bit odd, because we actually had someone go and have a look at this, and they got down and started sniffing the beam, and I thought, that's a pretty weird thing to do. This guy's supposed to be a specialist, and he's sniffing the beams, you know. But it turns out that what they used to do, when they put these dowling pegs into the beams, they would use honey to secure the dowling in the beams. So we have what we think is a late medieval beam in the lock, but we've not been able to actually date it for sure. And it is probably about a Tudor period mullioned window. It's got the right profile, it's been checked out, we certainly believe it is of a Tudor period. However, as you can see, some vandals have chopped the thing off the top. It was obviously much higher. The roof may have been higher. We don't actually know what's been going on there. But it's certainly in its original location. So it's like, well, okay, when did they chop the top of the window off? Well, we can tell you about 1610 to 1620. The work was almost certainly being done by Sir Bernard Grenville, who was, of course, the son of Sir Richard Grenville. Very nice. So how do we date it all though to 1610, 1620? Well, there's a couple of things going on here. You might have noticed little bits here that the observant might do. We believe that some of these, I am told by a professional, may be where in the olden days people used to cast their own metal buckles, would you believe, particularly in the Civil War period. And one or two of these have got those kind of marks going on. However, I want to know who has got a metal buckle with what appears to be a chicken's head on it. You can see that, a chicken's head, or possibly a hawk's head perhaps, but you can just see the eye at the top there. And that. So there's clearly something kind of,
It's going to be a hawk,
probably more likely a hawk, of course, but we like to say chicken's head. Yes, absolutely. However, it got a little bit more serious when this came out. And this, like all of these, was actually buried inside this wall. We have the remains of a cup. Okay. And you can see kind of got white stuff inside it. And if you look closely, you can see this kind of ochre, sort of yellow-brown underneath the white. You just see that little bit of fragments of it showing through. Okay. See the little sort of opening that's poking through underneath that. Okay. Yes, it would. The reason why it would have a handle is because this is a Cossenger. I actually took this to America, would you believe, because I couldn't get it dated over here. So I took it to America to a friend of mine, Linda Carnes McNaughton. Now, Linda Carnes McNaughton has an interesting job because she works at Jamestown. and she's working on the dig there where they found the original Jamestown fort from 1607, and they've been digging on it. A gentleman called Bill Kelso has been digging on it for years now. And she's the one actually in the finds, and that's where they're preserving everything. Now, I have to tell you, I've seen these finds room, by the way, and it probably stretches the length of all Hallam Street. It's absolutely enormous what they've got there. They have more North Devon pottery, by the way, than we do here in Bideford, I can assure you. They actually have Alison Grant's book on North Devon pottery, and I've seen their copy of it, and the first 2 chapters of it, which is the early stuff, have been virtually completely rewritten by them with the stuff that they've actually had out the ground there from North Devon. But anyway, I said, well, what is that? Because we can't date that over here. I haven't found anyone who's prepared to commit to that. And she said, well, that's a Pottinger. She said, which is a very high status cup, essentially. Datable 1610, 1620, very specific period because of the style of it and the way it's been made. And the handle and that tells her that this is actually Donyak pottery, which actually is a village just outside Ilminster. Now, there were 2 major areas of pottery going on at the time, here in North Devon and around Ilminster, and what they call the Donyak potteries. The Donyak stuff was generally finer quality than what we were producing here because the clay quality was also better. And I said, great. And she said it's lead glazed, which is what the yellow brown ochre is. That's lead. So, of course, the wealthy people were slowly poisoning themselves, which is why all our feelings are going, oh, you know, they're kind of loopy. You know. It's a little bit like today, isn't it? You know, all the wealthy are all like loopy. But anyway, that didn't explain the white stuff. And Linda said, well, actually, a little flaker that came off, and I've tested it. And I said, what is it? She said, it's plaster slip. And I said, oh, that's interesting. What have they been doing? She said, well, obviously, the plasterer, who was doing the works in 1610, 1620, would have had his brush, and what they would have done when they put the plaster up, it kind of goes a slightly off-white, kind of goes a dull sort of greyish colour when it's all finished, you know, all posh, ornate plasterwork. You've been to Buckland Abbey and these various other places, National Trust houses, seen wonderful ornate stuff, even in Tapley Park in the music room, for example. But what it would do, it would all finish rather dull. So to make it bright and shiny, they would actually make a plaster slip which would have chalk and lime and caustic and various other things in it to actually kind of bleach the plasterwork, and they would mix it up as like a slip or a paint, if you like, in a vessel, and that's what this is. And then of course they would apply it, and then it would go that lovely glossy white sort of fantastic finish. So this has been used by a plasterer in 1610, 1620 as his vessel for mixing up the slip. What is amazing, we even know the family that actually were using this vessel to do precisely that. And this may be the only known example of a workman's tool from that period that can be positively identified to one family. And the reason being is because we've got some plaster here, which we have found an exact replica of from the books of the family that did the work. So we know whose hands were actually on this vessel. Hopefully apart from Sir Bernard, if you like, or something like that, because he's about the same age. So anyway, that's the cup. So, let's move on to the next rooms. Okay. Anyway, the coat of arms caused some consternation, because there is actually a reference to it in the listing by English Heritage. And it refers, and I kind of, to the family Marwood. Now, the Marwood family doesn't actually exist. The Marwood name was taken by the family that first built... you know, it's just gone out of my mind. What's the name of the National Trust place up the road at the other side of Barnsley? What's it called?
Arlington.
Arlington, thank you. They were the first ones there, although obviously it's associated with the Chichester family. But Marwood was a name that the first family that moved there took, and then they became the Chichesters and so on. But the Marwood family coat of arms is nothing like this. And I actually sent an image of this off to another friend of mine who has this wonderful title. He's the Rouge Dragon at the Royal College of Arms. Now, isn't that a good job title? I am the Rouge Dragon. You know.
That's on the CV, yeah.
That's on my CV. I am the Rouge Dragon, yeah. And that is his title. And he looked at this one for me and he said, well, actually, he said, this is a little bit odd. He said, it's in trick in their books. Now, in trick means it's kind of just penciled out, which means it's not an official coat of arms. It's one that's been applied for. Okay? It's been applied for, but not actually granted. I said, well, that's interesting. What do you think's going on? So he did explain it to me. Anyway, we found a version of this coat of arms with a red background. So, what you've got to imagine here is the coat of arms, red background. These are goats' heads erased. Erased means torn, which is why they're straggly on the bottom. There would have been one there, and one in the middle. with the chevron door, or the gold chevron, that way. And on this chevron, there were 3 cinquefoils, almost like a clover leaf, if you like. Vaguely one smudged there, and obviously the other 2 have been destroyed by the idiot who put the wooden beam through the middle of it. But we've got enough of this, and the outline, or vague outline, of a helmet here. You can just see this kind of little bit of floral decoration here. To be able to determine that if this had a red background, it would have been for Richard Meredith of Leeds Abbey in Kent. This is the same as Leeds Castle is today, for those that know. The Leeds Abbey was bought by the Merediths, okay, from the St Ledger family, interesting enough. The St Ledgers, of course, used to live down the road at Anry at Weir Gifford. And Mary St Ledger was the wife, interestingly, of Sir Richard Grenville.